New research is saying that we need to be considering the ketogenic diet for brain cancer. Find out the details here on Jimmy Rants today. Click on that little box down there in the corner. It'll take you straight to IGTV for today's episode. JimmyRants.com is the website, and as always, you can engage live in the content. Come over to Instagram. That's where all the fun is. Check it out over there. I am at Livin' Low Carb Man, LIVINLOWCARBMAN. Once you're there, engage live. We are here Monday through Friday, 11 a.m. Eastern Time. So thank you guys for being here today. We also simulcast over here on my Facebook channels. Thank you guys for watching, as well as over on my YouTube stream. Thank you all for being here today on Jimmy Rants. If you missed the live, you can watch it on replay over here on IGTV. As soon as this is over, we throw it right up onto IGTV. And thank you to all my replay viewers. I see you out there. Hundreds of you are watching this the day that it releases. So you might not be here when I go live, but you are here later on in the day. And I really appreciate you watching on IGTV. I also appreciate all the people that watch on YouTube. We put the replay over there as well. Just type in a keyword, Jimmy Rants, you will find the show. And speaking of YouTube, it is Wednesday. So the Wednesday edition of the Livin' La Vida Low Carb Show, that's my podcast that I've had out there for a million years. My guest today is this guy named Ben Azadi. You might know Ben. He has this branding called Keto Camp. So had an engaging conversation with him about the work he's doing, about what inspired him, his father dying of a chronic disease that he could have prevented with keto. And so really, really heart-touching story. But we went into all kinds of subjects really deep. So go check out Ben Azadi. That interview is now up as a Jimmy Rants bonus episode over on YouTube. Go check that out, as well as on the Livin' La Vida Low Carb Show podcast, which will air later today, llvlc.com or wherever you listen to podcasts. And then finally, you guys, pop on over to the official website for Jimmy Rants. It's at jimmyrants.com. And while you're there, you can see all the past episodes there, but you can also show your support for what we're doing here. I've been sharing a lot of studies this week. I got another study to share with you here today. If you like getting like translation of studies and all kinds of information, I want to keep going with this, but I need your support. So go support through monthly donation with the Patreon link or through a one-time donation with the PayPal link. All of those links, you guys, are at jimmyrants.com. Okay, guys, so yes, this week has been the week of studies. I've been sharing all kinds of studies since Monday, and today is no different. I got another study to share with you. And today's is about one that a lot of people ask me about all the time. Is keto good for cancer? And of course, when you start talking about cancer, this is serious because it's a very serious disease. All of us in our lives know somebody that has gotten cancer, somebody close to us. They've gotten cancer, maybe have died from cancer. All of us have those stories. I sadly have in my direct family about 6 or 7 of those stories. In my extended family of like church and community organizations and things like that, we're talking many dozen. So it's a killer. It's a plague on our society. And so back to that question that people ask me often, they're like, well, Jimmy, is keto the answer to cancer? And it's a tricky question because not all cancers are glycolytically demanding. In other words, not all cancers feed on sugar, glucose. Now, there's this thing called the Warburg effect. So the Warburg effect, this guy, Otto Warburg, actually came up with this idea that we're feeding cancers with sugar, and if you starve the cancer cells, the tumor, with of sugar, then they can't feed, and so then they'll die off. That was his theory, and he actually won a Nobel Prize for that. Did you know that? Now, we told this story in my book, Keto Clarity, about Otto Warburg and the Warburg effect, but this has been well known for many years. The problem with Warburg's theory is it doesn't apply to every single cancer. And the problem is they don't know what cancers are exclusively glycolytically demanding and glucose fed. And there's actually a few cancers that are ketone fed. So going on a ketogenic diet would be very bad in those circumstances. And so you've got researchers who have been trying to dance around this, and there's somewhat of an ethical question when you start talking about cancer and doing therapies, nutrition therapies on people with cancer, because if it's the wrong therapy, they will die sooner. And so there's somewhat of an ethics issue there. But what we have seen when it comes to cancer are animal-based models and a few very small clinical studies. And speaking of Keto Clarity, in my book, in the back of the book, we listed some of the things we have solid science for, some of the things that we have good evidence for, and then the things that we have emerging evidence for. And I wrote this back in 2014. And on the cancer side of things, this was one of the emerging areas of science, was the cancer. That was the very first thing I listed. And Neurologic said there, a ketogenic approach is the single most effective dietary treatment for any and all forms of cancer. Again, science hasn't fully borne that out, but it has definitely been good for a lot of the ones they've tested. And other immune-related illnesses, you rob cancer of its needed fuel source, which is sugar. You rely on ketones and free fatty acids instead, which cancer cannot use. You can create an internal and epigenetic environment conducive to keeping cancers under control and even preventing them from being able to get a foothold in the first place. With a growing level of environmental toxicity and skyrocketing cancer rates, this particular way of eating could be just the preventative plan for the foundational approach for all. So that was a moment of clarity quote from Keto Clarity from my friend Nora Gedgaudas, and we go into great detail in that little section all about the Warburg effect and some of the other research that's out there from people like Dr. Thomas Seyfried has also been looking at this from Boston College. Eugene Fine did this thing called the RECHARGE study, the reduced carbohydrate against resistant growth tumors. All of those studies on humans, by the way, very, very small. And they get into it in this paper I'm going to read from today. And if you're just joining us, we're about to read from a paper that was published in the journal Current Nutrition Reports. This was back in July 27th of this year, 2020. That looks at, let's have a review of the possible uses of a ketogenic diet with this thing called malignant glioma. So gliomas are these brain tumors, and malignant means there's no cure. There's nothing they can do about them. So if these people are going to die anyway, if these people really have no drug, no nothing that can actually help them, don't we want to at least look at any option that might save their life or extend their life? And I think we do. And because of the Warburg effect, because of what Nora Gedgaudas said in my book, Keto Clarity, we should be considering the ketogenic diet. It's amazing to me that within research circles, the ketogenic diet is a dirty word. And yet we know that it has so many therapeutic uses in the body for a variety of reasons. Hormone control, inflammation reduction. I mean, I could go down the line of all these great benefits that ketosis helps people with. But for these people that have a malignant tumor in the brain, keep in mind, what's the brain consist of? That's right, it's 70% fat. And so if your brain is 70% fat, what do you think it runs very efficiently on? Is it glucose or is it fat and ketones? And I think it should be very obvious at this point. It's fat and ketones. And so if you're not eating sugar, which would exacerbate and feed that tumor in the brain, and you instead feed it ketones, which have no negative impact on a brain tumor, why would you not use this? That's so confusing to me. And then you've got all these cancer doctors that are just like, yeah, we're these oncologists. They're just, you bring up ketosis to an oncologist, they about lose their minds. And again, I have to ask, why? Especially when a patient is malignant, when their tumor is malignant. It's not going to go away. There's nothing you can do for them. Yeah, you can give them chemo, you can give them all the things, but if it's malignant, it's pretty much a death sentence eventually. So why not consider keto? Which is what this paper I'm about to read you says. So again, this was published in the Current Nutrition Reports. That's a medical journal, July 27th, 2020. The name of the article, Ketogenic Diet for Malignant Gliomas A review. The researchers are Jonathan Thomas and Errol Veznedderoglu. Veznedaroglu. All right, so let me read from it. Abstract. Purpose of the review. In this review, we examine the postulated mechanisms of a therapeutic effect of ketogenic diets in the treatment of gliomas. We review all the completed clinical trials, and we discuss further directions in the field. So the recent findings, cancers including gliomas are characterized by a derangement in cellular metabolism. In vitro and animal studies have revealed that dietary interventions that would lower your glucose levels and the glycolytic pathways in gliomas, in other words, those pathways where the glucose would get to the tumor, may have a therapeutic effect. Early trials in patients with malignant gliomas have shown feasibility, but are not robust enough yet to demonstrate clinical applicability. This is the problem, guys. Like, we have a theory that's out there. And the theory is if you cut the carbohydrates, the source of glucose, to a cancer tumor, and especially one of the brain, you're going to starve that tumor. And if you starve that tumor, what does the tumor do? It stops growing. It starts to reduce. And maybe it starts to go away. Why would anybody be against this? And especially in this case of what they're looking at here, malignant gliomas, they can't do anything more. So why, and especially since it's not a dangerous diet, ketogenic, we all eat keto. Most of you guys that watch Jimmy Rants, you eat a ketogenic diet. You're in a state of ketosis, at least from time to time, if not all the time. Why would they even hesitate on something that's natural? And by the way, it tastes good. And so these people are in a miserable state with this cancer in their brain. Why not have them have enjoyability in the foods they eat? And at the same time, get some benefits from that. And maybe they spontaneously fast, which adds even more benefits to that. Are you guys seeing the same kind of concerns that I am? Why is this even a question of whether we should look at this or not look at this? Obviously, we should look at this because people that have malignant tumors in their brain, they ain't going to get better. There's a reason they call it malignant. So a ketogenic diet should absolutely be considered. All right, the summary in the abstract says therapies for malignant gliomas of the brain are increasingly using a multi-targeted approach. So they do all kinds of things to try to extend life and to help these people be comfortable with that tumor. The use of a ketogenic diet and all of its variants may offer a unique, promising anti-glioma treatment by exploiting the metabolic alterations seen in cancers, including gliomas at the cellular level, which may work in concert with other therapies. Here's the thing. Here's where people get into trouble. You got people out there that say, oh, if you just eat keto, it's the cure for cancer. If you're one of those people, I'm going to slap you upside your head. We need to stop stepping ahead of the science. The science has not shown that yet. What the science has shown, at least in the limited human trials and in the animal studies, which we're going to look at in this paper, what it has shown is that a ketogenic diet in conjunction with other therapies, including chemotherapy, can be an effective measure. And what we've seen specifically with ketogenic diets is the need for ketotherapy is significantly less. So whereas you would normally have a specific dose of chemo administered to these patients, because they eat keto and you shut down some of that glycolytic pathway, they don't need as much chemotherapy. So let's not pretend like that keto is the answer to cancer. It most certainly is not. But as a baseline before any other therapies are even started, I think we need to be considering putting people into a state of ketosis. This would also be a place where exogenous sources of ketones, either through EKs or through the esters, the ketone esters, all should be on the table. Because if the point is to try to get glucose out of the body and ketones in the body, you want to do that as much as you can. Now keep in mind too, this level of therapeutic ketosis for battling cancer is not just the little willy-nilly keto that most of us do. This is a hardcore therapeutic use. Think about the kids with epilepsy and some of the other like traumatic brain injury, maybe Alzheimer's disease and Parkinson's. All of those studies, you're gonna freak out a little bit, but all of those studies have a 90% fat diet as a therapeutic for getting them into ketosis. And you're thinking, wow, do they really have to go that high? When you're trying to fight for your life and prevent some kind of a disease from ravaging your body, you bet your sweet bippy you are going to go 90%. Because what that does, and some of them even call for, and I know Dr. Seyfried calls for in his work at Boston College, a calorie restricted ketogenic diet, which would not only be 90% fat, but it would be like 1,000 calories. Other researchers, Dominique D'Agostino and other ones, have said, yeah, you don't really have to restrict calories that much because the point is to make sure you're getting therapeutic ketones. But they can debate those little minuscule things. The main point is getting a very, very high fat intake for the therapeutic use of ketosis is the key. All right, so let's get into the introduction. And again, if you just joined us, I'm going over a new analysis review study of the ketogenic diet for malignant gliomas. So these are the brain cancers. And the keto diet, they're arguing in this paper, must be considered. Again, if they're headed to an early grave because of this horrible disease, the least we can do is try every tool in the toolbox. And the ketogenic diet has unfortunately been left in that toolbox one too many times. Introduction. Glioblastoma, GBM, is the most common malignant primary brain tumor. Due to a lack of effective therapies, patients with new diagnosis of glioblastoma usually survive only for 14 more months. In the most current treatment paradigm, GBMs are treated with a combination of maximal safe resection follow-up followed by chemotherapy and radiation. Despite intense investigations of all new therapies in recent years, such as tumor-treating fields, immunotherapy, and vaccine therapy, the prognosis always remains dismal. In other words, all the newfangled ideas about extending the life of these cancer patients, they've all failed miserably. Currently, as no single new therapy appears to be radically changing the course of what happens, there is great interest in trying to combine the newer treatments in the hopes that a synergistic effect can significantly improve outcomes. So instead of like each one of those things that I just mentioned individually, they're trying to mix and match and say, okay, something's going to add up that's going to give us this grand cure, so to speak, to extend the life and maybe help to reverse the malignant tumor. Additionally, the marked heterogeneity of glioblastomas likely leads to variability in response to therapeutics. In other words, just like our metabolism, we all have different needs. Your tumor, if you get one in your brain, is going to have a different need depending on who you are and what you are. It's going to be very bio-individual, which makes it hard. Like, think about it. They think glioblastoma, okay, this is the therapy. But what if it's a therapy for like a percentage of the population, and then another percentage of the population does well on another therapy? Like, they're going to have to dig deeper into why there are different responses from the same tumors. As such, new treatment approaches that attack the cancer from new angles while complementing existing therapies are particularly attractive. So this is where keto comes into play. One of the features of cancer cells is this thing called dysregulation of cellular metabolism. In adopting a highly proliferative state, cancer cells reduce the utilization of the citric acid cycle and the oxidative phosphorylation for energy production, and instead they shift over to glycolysis. So what that means is you're basically burning sugar to fuel the cancer cells. That's the way it works. So I mentioned it earlier, but they put it here in the paper. The Warburg effect, remember Otto Warburg, was demonstrated back in 1927. Remember, he won the Nobel Prize in Medicine for this discovery. And it's considered a hallmark of cancer, including for glioblastoma. Like, we've known this now almost 100 years. And there's still an if about keto as it relates to this kind of cancer? Am I missing something here? If he won the Nobel Prize, don't we laud Nobel Prize winners as, wow, you're way ahead of the time. You came up with an idea that has viability. Why almost 100 years later are we still having the debate about whether keto is pretty good for cancer, and especially malignant glioma? Makes no sense at all. Keto is an attractive therapeutic target, and there have been numerous efforts to exploit this across many cancer types. The ketogenic diet, known as KD in research, is the most common therapy used to target this cancer feature. KD is a low carbohydrate, high fat diet that includes changes in body metabolism akin to starvation. So I've talked about this concept before. Within the research world, they refer to a ketogenic diet as fed starvation. In other words, it mimics all the effects of fasting / starvation, and yet you're eating food. So metabolically, what you get when you eat ketogenic and when you lower carbohydrate in your diet and you eat more fat in the diet, what you get is, in essence, all the benefits of a fasted state, almost all of them. You don't get quite the autophagy you get, but most of the other benefits that you get from a fasted state, you get from a very deep ketosis state. And this is why a ketogenic diet is so effective. It's why you start to see lower inflammation. It's why blood sugar and insulin come down. It's why you feel better. It's why all the things good in your body that happen, it's mimicking the effects of fasting. Now, again, you can rev up some of those same effects of keto when you actually fast, but the point is you're getting great benefits as if you're fasting. This affects the level of ketones, free fatty acid, insulin, glucagon, and glucose in your blood. Ketogenic diets have been used for many years to treat neurologic conditions, things like epilepsy. 1920, they were using a ketogenic diet to help kids with epilepsy. And a lot of those kids, before the ketogenic diet came along, a lot of those kids just died. They withered away into nothingness. And keto saved their lives. So, long known for epilepsy, traumatic brain injury, and stroke. Importantly, demonstrating a biologic effect in the brain. And again, guys, if you missed it earlier, the brain does not depend on glucose primarily. People think, oh, your brain needs glucose. It does need minor amounts of glucose, and you can get all the glucose your brain needs from the fat and protein you consume, this process called gluconeogenesis. And it's a very demand-driven process that when the body needs glucose, it can take some of the protein, some of the fat that you consume, which is primarily what you consume when you eat a keto or carnivore diet, and it translates it into glucose, which would feed the brain. But the vast majority of the brain is actually fed by ketone bodies. It is. Its efficacy in most of the established in the treatment of epilepsy, in which many randomized controlled clinical trials revealed benefit in seizure control, as well as with various types of ketogenic diets. So various types of ketogenic diets are that really therapeutic kind that I mentioned earlier, the 90% fat. But then there's more of a moderate kind of modified Atkins diet that I know the researchers at Johns Hopkins have been using for many years. So that one is more like the Atkins diet, except a little higher in fat, probably around 75% fat, which is more of kind of a traditional ketogenic diet. But they have to be deliberate about the foods they eat and that kind of thing. Eric Kossoff, Kosoff, is the researcher that's doing a lot of work on this modified ketogenic diet as it relates to epileptic children. So look his work up again at Johns Hopkins University, Dr. Eric Kossoff. Okay, randomized controlled trials were performed employing a classic ketogenic diet, medium chain triglyceride diet, and a modified Atkins diet, like I was just mentioning, with a low glycemic index diet also showing benefit. So the point is, every form of carbohydrate restriction is actually benefiting these conditions. And the reason is, it's the carbs that are the problem. This is nothing new to most of you that watch my show. But if this is new information to you, carbohydrates are really at the root of a lot of the issues that people tend to deal with when it comes to chronic disease, not the least of which is cancer, which is what we're talking about here today. And so that includes the so-called healthy ones too. Like people are like, well, I get lots of fiber from those grains that I eat. Okay, yeah, but you're getting a you-know-what load of glucose spiking carbohydrates. So the more you can minimize carbohydrates, which is why carnivore is so appealing to so many people, it's eliminating all those things. And why even mess with it? If you can eat meat and be satisfied and get all the nutrition you need and feel good, why would you even mess with even the so-called healthy carbohydrates? All right, so what about the pathways and the mechanisms as to why the ketogenic diet works? Ketogenic diets raise blood ketone bodies in the serum, which is your blood, and lowers the utilization of glucose. That makes sense. When you stop eating sugar and you stop eating carbs, which is what you do on a ketogenic diet, your ketones are going to go up. Why wouldn't the blood glucose come down? Think about that for a moment. People are like, oh, well, when my glucose go down, when my ketones go up, and I'm thinking, okay, think logically about that. What are ketones and what is glucose? They're energy sources, right? So when one energy source goes up, the other one's going to go down. So when you eat carbohydrates, what goes up? Glucose. What comes down? Ketones. So then the inverse of that is true as well. When you cut carbohydrates and you get more into a ketogenic state, what goes up? The fuel source is ketone bodies. So then what must logically come down? Blood glucose. I mean, it makes sense when you kind of spell it all out, but people can't wrap their heads around that in the moment. Ketone bodies are then used as substrates in the citric acid cycle, as well as the oxidative phosphorylation of the mitochondria. Along the lines of the Warburg effect, it is thought that the gliomas are more reliant on glucose and glycolysis than normal brain tissue. In other words, this tumor is actually not only feeding on the sugar, it's loving the sugar. And so it's going to eat it up and continue to grow. So again, this is a call for why maybe cutting the sugar and the other sources of glucose in the body down through a ketogenic diet can actually help with this glioma. And therefore may be susceptible to target energy deprivation with lower glucose levels. So again, you're trying to starve that tumor in your brain. And because your brain is very glycolytically demanding when it has a tumor in there, it actually feeds very well on ketones. So your brain will function quite well on ketones, and the tumor won't. Isn't that the goal? Aren't we trying to starve a tumor if it's in your brain? Yes. Again, I have to ask, why is this not like already being done? Why did there have to be a paper written about something that seems so obvious? Several studies have noted ultrastructural abnormalities in GBM mitochondria with aberrant or absent Crista E and defects in membranes, including alterations in the composition of these things called cardiolipins, an important lipid in the inner membrane. These mitochondrial abnormalities suggest a compromise in the mitochondrial function of oxidative phosphorylation, which uses reduced cofactors to yield adenosine triphosphate, that's the ATP, remember that's the source of energy, via oxygen carriers. Consequently, a fermentive state such as glycolysis would need to be utilized to a greater extent in order to meet the cellular energy demands. The high lactate concentrations of GBMs again suggest increased dependence on glycolysis. I hope you're getting this. Like everything that makes that tumor viable is all dependent on getting fed by glucose. And so again, anything that would reduce the glucose would benefit that cancer. In addition to glucose, other fermentive fuels used may include glutamine for glutaminolysis, a process which also helps to regenerate antioxidants to reduce susceptibility to reactive oxygen species and generate byproducts aiding in cellular proliferation. So that's good. Although that also is an argument for why some proteins may also be problematic when it comes to this. So putting all the focus just on the glucose and then forgetting about the amino acids, and in this case glutamine, if that's actually providing a benefit, then that'd be a good thing. So it's kind of interesting they're pointing that out. Numerous clinical studies have shown that hyperglycemia, which is high blood sugar, is associated with poorer progression-free and overall survival in patients with GBM, controlling for the presence of diabetes, steroid use, and other confounders, and may in fact independently contribute to worse outcomes. And again, if the theory is that higher ketones are being protective and therapeutic when it comes to this tumor, then it makes sense that if you are having higher blood sugar, you're going to have lower blood ketones. That makes total sense that you would get that result. If this were the case, it would suggest that changes in body metabolism could be affecting the outcome in a malignant glioma. In fact, this thing called IDH, isocitrate dehydrogenase, a key enzyme in the citric acid cycle that converts isocitrate into alpha ketoglutarate, is mutated in a large subset of people with GBMs and most of the low-grade gliomas. The presence of this mutation is associated with a significantly less aggressive phenotype in the glioma, which again suggests cellular metabolic changes are tied to prognosis in the glioma. In other words, you can choose to feed yourself with glucose, or you can choose to feed yourself with ketones. And the way your metabolism goes will be the way the tumor goes. Are you getting the picture here, you guys? I know it's a little bit deep, but this science is so important to know. Additionally, glucose and glycolysis are thought to activate important pathways that prevent cell death. Overactivity of AKT, PIK3, mTOR results in a proliferative state and is an important route that cancer cells like to exploit. In addition to other solid tumors, this pathway is overactive when it comes to many of these gliomas. Glucose and glycolysis may activate the tyrosine kinase AKT via the prevention of activation of this thing called BAX, a apoptotic protein. Easy for me to say. In this manner, diets that reduce glucose and glycolytic activity may have this anti-proliferative effect on the cancer, independent of the Warburg effect. So they're showing you all the ways that it's not just starving the cancer of the glucose, it's also what are you feeding to replace that glucose with, which is why the ketones are so important. All right, so then they go into some of the preclinical studies that have been conducted looking at ketogenic diets as it relates to malignant gliomas. So I hope you're still with me, guys, because this is a little bit deep, but it's so important to know this stuff. Several studies have looked at the metabolic flexibility of gliomas with regard to energy utilization. One study implanted CT2A mouse astrocytomas and U87 human gliomas in mice, and then they subjected the mice to a high-fat, low-carb ketogenic diet. The authors found the gene expression of mitochondrial enzymes include 3-hydroxybutyrate dehydrogenase was lower in tumor compared with the contralateral brain. In other words, the control. Another study looking at the in vitro expression of 3-hydroxybutyrate dehydrogenase and other ketone body metabolizing enzymes in human glioma cells U87 and T98. Though mRNA and protein expression was evident, there was still a absence of substantial 3-hydroxybutyrate metabolism. Additionally, administration of 3-hydroxybutyrate was unable to rescue glioma cells from glucose withdrawal-induced cell death. Interestingly, this study also demonstrated quantitatively that there was a reduction in vessel microdensity in the ketogenic diet treatment group in comparison with the standard diet group. So they saw with keto, these mice, the tumor shrunk. However, not all studies have supported the hypothesis that glioma cells cannot harness ketone bodies as a metabolic substrate. This is what I was warning you about at the very beginning. Keto is not the answer for cancer. If you're one of those people in the keto community saying that, shut up, because you're so wrong. You're stepping ahead of the science. The science has not shown that. What we have seen is that in many cancers that are glycolytically demanding, they do tend to do well with a ketogenic diet. But let's not broad brush all cancers when it comes to keto. One study used RG2 and 9L xenograft glioma rat models subjected to the ketogenic diet. After injection of the labeled ketone bodies, magnetic resonance spectroscopy revealed ketone body oxidation in the tumor equal to that in the normal brain. In other words, it was metabolizing it and it was using it as a fuel. This is what I was talking about. They can sometimes feed on ketone bodies, and scientists are trying to figure out why and which ones do that. Additionally, histochemistry revealed upregulation in the transporter of the ketone body monocarboxylate in tumors. Additionally, another study suggested that for in vitro culture of gliomas, glucose restriction may actually enrich the glioma stem cells. Again, feeding that cancer cell with ketones. So again, let's don't broad brush this and think it's going to be across the board applicable. This is why the researchers need to parse this out, and this is why there is reticence about using human subjects until they can figure out why some people respond well to a ketogenic diet when it comes to cancer tumors and others don't do so well. Preclinical in vivo studies examining ketogenic diet for the treatment of solid cancer and other body locations have confirmed that there is great potential of ketogenic diet as being anti-cancerous. One meta-analysis looked at 59 studies that employed mouse and rat models. They found that calorie restriction and keto showed effectiveness against cancer with a pooled odds ratio of 0.20. Another study performed this thing called Bayesian random effects meta-analysis on 12 different studies using mice with an unrestricted, in other words, they didn't calorie restrict, the ketogenic diet compared with a standard diet, and they found a mean survival time ratio of 0.85 and 0.55, both of those being significant. Of note, however, the included studies using brain tumors had decreased benefit compared with those in other body parts. So I love that this research, this kind of analysis review of the research is happening, because if you don't already know about what's out there, we can't be demanding research if we don't know what the current research is. So if nothing else, today on Jimmy Ranch, you're learning what the current research is already out there. And so far, it's a lot of mouse models. Preclinical in vivo studies to study the therapeutic effects of ketogenic diet on gliomas have generally employed murine models. 24 studies have been performed looking at tumor growth and survival using a variety of nutritional restrictions. 12 of the studies used a ketogenic diet. One used keto supplementation, so that's the exogenous ketones we were talking about. 9 used purely calorie restriction, which is also ketogenic, and 2 of them used short-term starvation, which again is ketogenic. These studies were not only heterogeneous with regard to therapeutic diet, they differed in choice of subcutaneous versus intracranial glioma models and cell lines as well. Nevertheless, 17 of the 24 studies showed a significant decrease in tumor with the ketogenic and calorie-restricted diet. Of the 16 studies performing survival analysis, 10 of them demonstrated a significant increase in survival with this intervention. Examining surrogate endpoints, 19 of the 24 studies demonstrated a decreased level of blood glucose. You would assume that would happen when they go on a ketogenic diet. And 18 of the 20 studies showed increases in the ketone levels of the blood. Taken in total, there was a trend towards decreased blood glucose being associated with an increased survival and a decrease in the tumor growth. That is huge, you guys. That is a theory-creating hypothesis that now must be tested in humans. They've shown it in mice and rat studies again and again and again. And so now we need more of the human studies. And like I mentioned, the Recharge study from Eugene Fine is one of the few. I think his study had maybe 10 or 11 patients. that's not enough to make a splash when it comes to the research world. We really need it to be on a grander scale. Preclinical studies have also looked at potentiating effects of ketogenic diets with other glioma therapies such as radiotherapy. Remember, it's not keto alone, it's a conjunction with things like chemotherapy. One study used an intracranial bioluminescent mouse model with an implanted glioma, and they found that in mice who got a ketogenic diet plus radiation, survival and tumor reduction appeared to markedly improve in a synergistic manner. So in other words, the ketogenic diet made the chemo work better. And I've talked to many people on the Live and La Vida Low Carb show that are cancer experts that say just that keto enables them to go through radiation, but not as much of it, so they don't get the negative effects. And then the radiation, not only less of it, but then it works more efficiently. So you get this kind of double whammy with that synergistic effect, combining a ketogenic diet with the radiation. The ketogenic diet alone therapy provided only a modest benefit. Other anti-glioma therapies may be potentiated as well. In another study complementing a clinical study, nude mice with implanted U87 gliomas received the VEGF inhibitor. It's called bevacizumab, an agent often employed in the treatment of recurrent GBM. The mice were placed either on a standard diet or on the ketogenic diet. The mice in the that big long B word again, that combined it with ketogenic diet had prolonged survival and a trend in reduction in the tumor volume by an MRI that did not reach significance. The ketogenic diet alone did not provide a survival benefit in this study. All right, so that's all the preclinical studies. What about clinical studies? Preclinical models demonstrating the promise of ketogenic diets as a general cancer treatment have now prompted human clinical trials. So we're going to see where this has been used. In one systematic review, 13 studies were identified that examined endpoints of progression-free survival and overall survival, including 2 of them were randomized controlled trials. Though limited by small numbers, 4 of the trials showed beneficial effects from the therapy with regard to malignant glioma. Anecdotal reports hinted at a potential therapeutic potential. One of the first reports of possible efficacy involving 2 pediatric patients with malignant astrocytomas who were started on a ketogenic diet. Subsequently, blood glucose decreased and then was accompanied by a 20 to 30-fold increase in their serum ketones. 20 to 30-fold. So let's see. If they started, let's just say 0.2. 0.2 and then 20 to 30 fold. So 20 would be 4.0 on the blood ketones, and 30 would be 6.0. That's a significant increase in your blood ketones. FDG PET scans indicated a 22% average decrease in glucose uptake at the tumor site. So they showed demonstrably the tumor isn't getting fed as much glucose as it was. One patient exhibited symptomatic improvement. In other words, they weren't feeling well and then suddenly they were. That's awesome. While there is a dearth of clinical trials assessing the anti-glioma effect of ketogenic diets to date, there have been several feasibility studies completed. And this is the beautiful thing, and they show them in table 1 up here, the various ones that have been used. One called the Ergo trial in 2014, had 20 patients. They used a low-carb ketogenic diet over 5 weeks, and then they followed up at 32 weeks. The Woodhouse study in 2019 for newly diagnosed gliomas with the modified Atkins diet, 97% stayed in the study. That's huge. It's a 2-year survival rate of 28%. Remember, they usually die within 14 months, so 2-year survival rate of over a quarter of them. That's huge. The Vanderloo 2019 study about newly diagnosed GBM was a liquid ketogenic diet plus MCT, and it lasted for 55 weeks. And then the Keating trial of newly diagnosed GBM, 12 patients in that one, and modified ketogenic diet with MCT over 14 weeks, and they're at 67 weeks total now. So yeah, lots of kind of interesting small studies. 20, 29, 9, and 12 is the number of study participants in those particular studies. But this is the thing. They're just feasibility studies. We actually need to be doing it on a grander scale. I think they've proven the efficacy. I guess they haven't seen enough consistency with improvement to think that it's staying within their Hippocratic oath to first do no harm. That's the only thing I can think of that would keep them from making this on a grander scale. And plus, you're also talking about cancer patients. They're all over the place. It's kind of hard to get cancer patients to maybe fly into one particular central location. So that would be another kind of limitation of having more patients in a trial. In the Ergo trial, 20 patients with recurrent GBM were given a low-carb ketogenic diet. 3 of the patients discontinued the diet because they didn't tolerate it well. In the remaining 17, serum ketosis was achieved in 12 of the 13 patients. Median PFS was only 5 weeks, and the median survival from enrollment was 32 weeks. Though blood ketones were achieved, glucose levels were not significantly lowered. They used this thing called dexamethasone, or use of that increased during the treatment, which may have blunted the glucose lowering effect. So I assume that's one of the cancer adjunct kind of medicines, and it does mess with it. This is the problem when you're looking at this issue of cancer. They're using all kinds of therapies trying to help these patients survive. And so in the midst of that, some of those drugs don't come without consequences. And so that's something to be considered in this discussion as well. In another feasibility trial, a modified Atkins diet was employed alongside standard radiation and temozolomide. After initial diagnosis, 29 patients were enrolled. Numerous glioma types were included. Successful ketosis was achieved in all the patients, and the diet was well tolerated, with only 1 patient having to abort the therapy. The diet was modified as needed by a dietitian in order to make sure they got into a state of ketosis. 25 patients had reduction of BMI with the therapy. For the survival in those who had glioblastoma, 2 patients were excluded for insufficient follow-up. Of the remaining 17 patients, 2-year survival rate, this is the one I was talking about a while ago, 26.7%, which was in line with expected survival using standard therapy. So I guess they're saying, okay, well, this is what we would see normally, a almost 27% survival rate if we just use the standard therapies. So did you really show that there was efficacy with keto? That's the question researchers are mulling over. A third feasibility study enrolled 9 patients who were undergoing initial standard chemoradiation and administered them to an exclusively liquid ketogenic diet. What are you doing? Just mainlining MCT oil? And I guess like high-fat shakes? Is that what they mean by an exclusive liquid ketogenic diet? After the initial 6 weeks and completion of radiation, patients were switched over to a solid ketogenic diet with MCTs. Patients on dexamethasone were excluded because, remember earlier, that was the drug that raises blood sugar. 1 patient dropped out of the study, and 2 patients were not able to tolerate the diet. Adequate ketosis, which they call from a therapeutic state for this study, over 3 millimole, was reached in all of the remaining patients. The small numbers preclude any analysis of therapeutic effect, but the median survival was 12.8 months, which is lower than what's expected with the standard of care, which is 14.6 months. Despite the patients being generally young, on average 53.8 years old. However, all the patients were IDH wild-type glioblastoma, which carries a median survival that is half of normal glioblastomas. So the fact that they went 12.8 months, they should have only gone 7.3 months. They're celebrating they gave them about 5 to 6 more months of life. Quality of life was also assessed at baseline during the study and at the conclusion with a standard EORTC form and a coping questionnaire. The exclusion of patients taking that drug we talked about incurred significant selection bias, likely tilting to more favorable outcomes In the assessment, some gastrointestinal complaints persisted throughout the study. Well, yeah, if you're mainlining MCT oil, you're going to have some gastric distress. So that's kind of the problem. I wonder if instead of MCTs, they could have used ketone esters or used exogenous ketones and gotten a similar effect that the MCTs did. But again, when these studies were conducted, I don't know if those were quite ubiquitous like they are today. A fourth feasibility study, remember going over all the clinical studies, the Keating study was a randomized prospective pilot study and enrolled GBM patients who were ready to undergo standard chemoradiation. The enrolled patients would be randomized to either a modified ketogenic diet or a ketogenic diet with MCTs. Out of 42 eligible patients, only 12 of them enrolled, and among the enrollees, 2 withdrew prior to the study beginning, and 6 of the remaining 10 got out before the 3-month primary endpoint was reached. 3 patients completed the 12-month intervention in the follow-up study involving interviews of eligible patients and their caregivers. The authors determined all the considerations were an important factor in limiting enrollment. The authors suggested a 6-week rather than 3 months dietary intervention might be more feasible if they're going to do this in the future. So despite the lack of any prospective trials with sufficient patient numbers to detect an effect, there are many trials ongoing, with 3 trials recruiting currently and another 3 that are active. You can go check them out, clinicaltrials.gov. I'm sure if you put in ketogenic cancer as keyword searches, you'll find them. Okay, so they're hoping that those studies bring greater clarity to the ketogenic diet and the treatment of glioma. Okay, ongoing areas of study. Some clinical studies are enrolling patients with newly diagnosed gliomas, while others are recruiting patients with recurrent gliomas as well as GBMs. Each of these patient groups provide different advantages when they look at them in a clinical study. In patients with recurrent gliomas, recruitment might be easier, and the ketogenic diet as a monotherapy can potentially be employed, allowing direct assessment of the intervention. That would be interesting. Rather than looking at the synergistic effects with chemotherapy, let's see what ketogenic does by itself in that patient population. It's kind of like COVID-19 and the whole hydroxychloroquine, zinc, and azithromycin. If you get the patient early enough when they get the virus, then that can deal with it. But once they get hospitalized and it's too far progressed, that therapy doesn't work anymore. Same goes for the ketogenic diet. Used alone at a certain point in the development of the tumor, could it be used as a singular monolithic way to treat it? That would be interesting if they could get that study done. However, recurrent gliomas will have undergone highly variant treatments, and this can result in disparate responses as well as limiting the generalization. In the study of newly diagnosed gliomas, the tumors are uncontaminated by treatments other than surgery, and any dietary intervention would have to be given alongside chemoradiation. Fortunately, based on the animal studies, ketogenic diets appear to function best as a complement to other therapies rather than supplanting them altogether. In further studies that aim to investigate therapeutic effect, PFS will be an important endpoint. It may more directly measure objective biologic effects of the therapy, whereas OS in GBM can be affected by numerous factors such as choice or efficacy of a second-line therapy. All right, let's see. A central impediment in assessing for clinical effect is the variance in the dietary intervention that's used in each study. It limits the ability to pool data and draw any conclusions. The optimal diet would have to have the right balance of toleration of ketosis and glucose levels. Again, the goal is to get the glucose down and the ketone bodies up. For instance, ketogenic diet with strict caloric restriction may not be appropriate in some patients with glioblastoma, who often struggle with poor nutritional intake. So hunger, satiety starts to kick in. You want to give them enough food to feel good, but not so much food that maybe you lose the effects of the ketosis. In some of the feasibility trials, adherence was difficult, even with intense supervision of the diet. The modified Atkins diet appears to be better in adherence when it comes to epilepsy, but it's unclear what the optimal carbohydrate amount ideal for anti-cancer treatment would be. To me, if you've got it and you're trying to be therapeutic, why have any carbohydrate in there at all? Now, some people would say, well, it adds variety and it helps to make it more palatable, blah, 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 blah. But I wonder if it's only causing more problems because you have to try to figure out how much carb. How about no carb and just make it heavy fat with moderate protein? I don't know. Makes sense to me. The appropriate length of the dietary intervention needs to be determined on an individual basis. Although several of the clinical studies demonstrated patients were able to continue their diet beyond the prescribed intervention period, one study suffered from significant patient dropout and suggested that they need a shorter intervention period. Additionally, proper standardized biomarkers for appropriate ketosis will also be needed. That's true. If you're going to test ketones, you can't have one group testing urine ketones, another group testing breath ketones, another one doing blood ketones. You kind of have to standardize. What is that standard? Is it blood? Is it something like the biosense meter that translates breath ketones over into beta hydroxybutyrate, which would be the blood? All of those things need to be hashed out in the research. The use of dexamethasone, which is that drug in cancer, can greatly palliate the neurologic symptoms related to gliomas, but can interfere with dietary interventions trying to be ketogenic and lowering blood glucose. Strictly excluding patients who are on this drug from trials certainly would be a selection bias, and not allowing this to be used during trials could result in a higher dropout or poorer results. Consequently, elucidating the relationship of this on anti-cancer effects of ketogenic diet is an important area of future investigation. I wonder, they did a future study looking at patients on that drug and then easing them off of it while easing them onto keto. Would there be benefit, and could they say, if they get the results they think they will, that you can switch people off of that drug and put them onto ketogenic as a replacement? Would be worthy of looking at. And again, it's a reminder, these drugs don't come without side effects and consequences. And the side effects and consequences include messing with your blood sugar, which then messes with your hormones, which, by the way, starts messing with the tumor that's in your brain. It may be that dexamethasone in smaller amounts might be sufficient to give the neurologic symptoms and not conflict with the diet. For example, in immunotherapy trials for GBM, dexamethasone is limited to smaller doses, but not excluded entirely. The interaction between the ketogenic diet and the molecular landscape of gliomas also needs to be better elucidated. More and more cancer treatment is being directed by the molecular and the genetic characteristics of the tumor. Specifically in glioblastoma, it would be important to know whether the ketogenic diet has a differential effect depending on the various mutations and the status of the tumor. So as mutant gliomas have disruption of the citric acid cycle, an important component of oxidative phosphorylation, ketogenic diets could potentially have a greater effect in the subset of gliomas. In one of the clinical trials, the overall survival results were disappointing after dietary intervention, but all of the patients had a very aggressive form of GBM. Perhaps ketogenic diets are more effective in the milder versions of GBM. So we're finally at the end, you guys. Thanks for sticking with me on this long study, but it's so important to know this information. Conclusion: ketogenic diets and all of its variants offer an attractive potential therapy for gliomas. They exploit the unique metabolic characteristics of cancer and its dependence on glucose and glycolysis. Ketogenic diets are able to promulgate a biologic effect in the brain, as evidenced by the established efficacy in neurologic disorders such as epilepsy. Animal studies have been promising, and ketogenic diets and its variants appear to complement and synergize with, rather than supplant current anti-glioma therapies. Though available human trials are few, with low numbers precluding identification of therapeutic effect, these trials appear to demonstrate feasibility and safety with certain forms of ketogenic diets. Further clinical study is warranted. So, guys, there you have it. We have a thorough review of the ketogenic diet as it relates to malignant gliomas, brain cancers, And thank you to Jonathan Thomas and Errol Vesnetaroglu. They got this published in the journal Current Nutrition Reports back in July 27th, 2020. The title, Ketogenic Diet for Malignant Gliomas, a review. Go check it out. I actually had a nurse friend of mine send me that, because when I went to get it, it was behind a firewall paywall. And I said, I know you're interested in these kinds of subjects. And so she printed it out for herself, paid for it, and then sent me a copy so I could share it with you guys here today on Jimmy Rants. All right, I'm interested in seeing what you guys have to say about this. Is this an interesting study to you? Should we be looking at more of these kinds of therapies as it relates to cancers of all kinds, not just malignant brain tumors, but really any kind of cancer? I hope this becomes a topic that gets thoroughly investigated. And I've been calling for it ever since I put it in Keto Clarity as emerging evidence. We have lots of emerging evidence from all those things that I just mentioned in there that shows this can have efficacy if it's used properly. All right, let's come over here first to Instagram, then over to Facebook, finally over to YouTube. Thank you all for being here today on Jimmy Rants. See what you have to say about this one here. Marnie says, a friend of mine had breast cancer. She naturally ate much meat and vegetables. She was doing well. It was shrinking. Someone else convinced her to stop eating meat and to instead take a tonic with lots of grains in it, and she died 4 months later. That's too bad. And people make choices based on very compelling evidence that might not be grounded in anything, which is why I think we always need to go back to what the research is showing. It's why I read so many research papers to you guys here. It would be very easy for me to just say, oh yeah, everybody, keto is the answer for all cancer, so go starve those cancer cells and just don't eat carbs. But it would be wrong. It's not the full picture. It's kind of like when you go to a court of law and they say, you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God. It's true that you do starve cancer cells, some, but it's not the whole truth. And so if it's not the whole truth, we need to be slowing our roll. And I'm going to keep calling out the keto community, all those people that think that just lowering carbs and getting into a state of ketosis is going to solve all your cancer problems. No. Now, do you have a greater propensity of preventing cancer from happening and possibly helping the cancer if you do get cancer? Probably, but let's not assume it in the case of all cancers. And Marnie, I'm sorry about your friend who had breast cancer and then was doing well and then not doing well once they decided to go off and do something else. Joshua says, were those mice fed animal fats or vegetable oils? I wonder if they still had better outcomes on vegetable oils. How amazing would they do with healthy fats? Honestly, I don't know. A lot of those kind of mice studies, they actually use saturated fat with a mix of mono. I'm not aware that they use vegetable oils, but it did not say in this review, Joshua. All right, thank you, Instagram. Let's pop over here now to my Facebook page. What's up, Facebook? See what you have to say about this one. Thank you guys for being here today on Jimmy Rants. Melissa says, yes, you can eat well and makes my body feel so much better. Fasting is good, but I love to eat. Yes, fed fasting. That is what keto is. It's fed fasting. You're getting a lot of the benefits of being in a fasted state, being in a heavily ketogenic state. And it's wonderful. Just ate some Boston butt and a salad. Next month will be my 5-year ketoversary, keeping off 50 pounds. That's awesome, Melissa. Keep it up. Kay says, I definitely enjoy life more eating low carb. And you're going to enjoy not just life more, but more life. Yeah, I'm convinced that keto saved my life. And I'm going to live a whole lot more life. I ain't close to being done yet, you guys. I hope I live to be 110.
Yeah, welcome back to Jimmy Rants. Episode 9343 today. What was I saying?
Oh. Kay says, happy to catch you live today. Well, I'm happy you're here, Kay. Thank you so much for watching. And thank you, Facebook. Let's pop over here now to my YouTube channel, see what you guys have to say. You like my old man voice? Thank you for keeping us informed. You're welcome, Walker. That is my jam. You've been following me a long time, so you know. Craig says, sorry if discussed, can keto be used as a preventative measure for such cancers? Why would it not? It makes sense that if it's going to be used as a therapeutic, that if you're not feeding your body glucose in large amounts, that it's not possible that a glycolytically demanding cancerous tumor, it couldn't grow. So yeah, I think as a preventative, it's probably great. I wonder what percentage of those diagnosed with the big C ate low carb. Probably not many. So I know when I interviewed Dr. Thomas Seyfried, the researcher out of Boston College, been about a decade ago now, that I interviewed him. He threw something in at the end of the interview that just blew my mind. And remember, he's a ketogenic diet cancer researcher. He said, if you want to prevent cancer, this is his words, guys, not mine. If you want to prevent cancer, then go on a 7 to 10 day distilled water and salt only fast. Now, later on, I tried to figure out what the distilled water was about. And he's like, well, most of the waters are contaminated and could cause some things to happen in the body. So if you get distilled water, then it basically gets all of that out of there. But I assume if you get any kind of cleaner water that doesn't have any chlorine and all that other stuff in it, that probably works as well. But it was interesting, 7 to 10 days, just once a year, a 7 to 10 day distilled water with salt fast, which is great because I'm a big fan of fasting, as you guys well know. And I think you can get lots of benefits. And if it helps to prevent cancer, why would you not throw in 7 days of not eating? It's not a big deal. Shirley says, Logan Sneed, I love Logan, had brain cancer and used keto to fight it. It's pretty amazing. Yeah, go look up Logan Sneed. He's definitely a great inspiration. Super young guy too. Super smart. Yeah, thank you for mentioning his name, Shirley. Appreciate that. All right, guys, so good news, right? The keto diet has to be considered for these malignant brain tumors. These gliomas, they are really nasty things, and yeah, it's one of those things that if we don't take it seriously and look at this as a therapeutic, I don't think we're treating patients well. You have to give patients all the information and let them decide. You know, those people that didn't tolerate the ketogenic diet, I don't know what's not to tolerate. It's delicious, tastes good, feel good. Now, obviously, I've never had cancer, so maybe in the midst of the cancer, some of the things used to treat the cancer might cause the ketogenic diet to not be as desirable, but really anything would not be desirable. So you kind of have to take that into play as well. But if you don't have cancer and you want to prevent cancer, there's certainly no downside to eating a ketogenic diet. That's it for this episode of Jimmy Rants. JimmyRants.com is the website. And as always, you can engage live in the content. Come right here. I am on Instagram Monday through Friday, 11 a.m. Eastern Time. So follow me there at Livin' Low Carb Man, LIVINLOWCARBMAN. Once you're there, engage live. We had a really great time today. Thank you so much for being here today on Jimmy Rants. We also simulcast live over here on my Facebook page. So thank you guys for watching today over on Facebook. We also enjoy having my YouTube channel Peoples as well. So thank you guys for watching. Thank you all for watching today on Jimmy Rants. If you missed the live, you can watch it on replay right here on IGTV. So check it out. As soon as we're done, we'll get that right up there. We also throw the past episodes up over on YouTube. Type in a keyword Jimmy Rants. You will find the show. And don't forget, Jimmy Rants bonus episode. Ben Azadi is over there from Keto Camp. We had a great conversation on the Livin' La Vida Low Carb show. Go watch it over on YouTube or listen to the podcast Livin' La Vida Low Carb show, LLVLC.com or wherever you listen to podcasts. And then finally, before we get out of here, go check out the official website for this show. It is JimmyRants.com. See all the past episodes there, but most importantly, you can support my work. If you like getting cutting edge science and getting it translated here on Jimmy Rants, I go out of my way, you guys, to look for this kind of thing, to benefit you. So if you think that's worthy of supporting my work, I would love to have your support. Go and support my Patreon page if you want a monthly donation. I got a lot of people that do like $5 a month, and I'm grateful for those people, and it's wonderful. I appreciate them greatly. Or if you just want to do a one-time donation, you can do that with a PayPal link, and really any donation of any amount would be greatly appreciated. All right, guys, that's it for now. Thank you so much for watching. We will be back again tomorrow. We'll have another study. I've done a study Monday, study Tuesday, study Wednesday. I may have another study tomorrow, but you'll have to tune in to find out. So until then, we'll see you then.